Check. When your name is called, please answer with here or present. Member Frost?
Here.
Member Killebrew?
Here.
Member Vixoric?
Present.
Vice Chair Federico?
Present.
And Chair Orlando. And for the record, all members of the Financial Review Committee are present with the exception of Chair Orlando, who is absent.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. And it does not look like we have any of the members of the public here. Have we received any public comment electronically?
We have no public comments at this time.
Okay, then I'm going to forego the comments about how we're going to do public comments. If we do have anyone show up, I'll read over those rules. But we will forward right ahead to new business and approval of the minutes of the August 25th, 2020 Financial Review Committee. And I will move to accept or to approve those minutes.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Mr. Killebrew?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 2. This is the quarterly financial report for the period ending June 30th. We didn't have this available prior to the last meeting, and this is a receive and discuss for the committee. Mr. Killebrew, do you want to brief us on it?
A brief report would be at our August meeting. I covered unaudited numbers that are very similar to these, not very many adjustments, and I would just recommend receiving and filing.
Any questions or comments from the committee? No? Mr. Frost?
No.
Okay, I don't have any questions, and we can consider that item received and discussed. Item number 3 is the quarterly financial report for the period ending September 30th. Mr. Killebrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So fiscal year to date from July 1 through September 30, our numbers are tracking in line with the amended budget that council considered September 15th and adopted all the adjustments to the general fund budget. I did again discuss all of those budget adjustments, or most of those budget adjustments, with the Financial Review Committee back in August, and they did recommend moving those to the council for consideration. Hotel occupancy tax being that and sales tax being our biggest concerns this year, given the impacts of COVID. We are tracking a little bit ahead of the projections that we had put together a couple of months ago back in August. But we're still a little wary of what's ahead of us during the winter months. So kind of expecting at this point in time not to amend the TOT budget, and we're still wait and see what's happening with the hotels. But again, tracking a little bit ahead on TOT sales tax, slightly behind, maybe 50,000 if I project out for the year based on the payment I got noticed of earlier today. Everything else seems to be tracking in line with the amended budget. So no surprises at this point. We have received our CARES Act funds, both county and state. And Robin here has been diligently processing all the paperwork of all of our expenditures and all the reports that we have to do. It's, as you can imagine, a complicated process given the short time that the CARES Act rules were put together, but she's doing a great job, and we're expecting to be able to prove out that we are using those funds appropriately. And we also did get our CDBG monies, the 86,000. That was a question. I guess not. Okay, we do have I did sign the final paperwork on that recently. So again, all the funding we're getting in regarding COVID relief, we are diligently processing. There is nothing on the horizon as far as we know from the federal government for further relief for local governments, and we did not include those in the budget. And we're in good shape in that regard. If it shows up, it'll be good news. So with that, we're just staying the course. I'll talk a little bit more about what's ahead of us when we go through the budget calendar on the next item.
Questions or comments?
No questions.
Mr. Frost?
Makes sense.
I have one quick question on the COVID related grant money. Has that already been? And we talked in the past about we're not going to plan for any reimbursements. The stuff that we're talking about now that Robin is processing, has that already been accounted for and booked, or are we going to see that as a benefit to our bottom line once she's able to work through all that stuff?
We've gotten the cash payments. We've set them up in a trust account basically, and we're recognizing the revenue as we're proofing out the expenditures. So it's in the budget as revenue. We didn't add any expenses, but we do have it in the amended budget for revenues. The total is $700,000.
And that's the
Some of
700,000
it
that we've
including-
already put into the amended budget, right? So all
Right.
that money is accounted for. Nothing
Yes.
new, no new windfalls to our bottom line from any of the stuff that you're just talking about. You're working on, right, Robin?
Not yet.
If anything comes from FEMA, I'd be knowing additional, but that's not guaranteed.
Right.
We're still waiting.
Okay, so that's a good point. So we did not amend the budget for any FEMA reimbursements. We do expect some, and it will basically free up some of the CARES Act money to cover additional eligible expenditures. So not amending the expenditure budget, but we do expect some money coming in from FEMA, which our waterfall is eligible expenditures use the FEMA money first, then the CARES Act state money, and then the CARES Act county money. And some of that has to do just with reporting and some flexibility we might have in how we're utilizing the money. So
Do we have any idea, rough ballpark, the size of the FEMA grant if it shows up?
We're doing it in chunks.
Mhm.
And so far, only one of them, we've got, received a request for more information from FEMA. That's been submitted, and now it's the waiting game.
what was the dollar amount on that one?
Around 80,000.
Okay. That stimulate any other questions or discussion?
The money that comes in, intergovernmental revenues,
Okay, but it's not here now.
I don't believe we've recognized any of the money yet.
All right. That's, I guess, it. We'll consider that item received and discussed. Item number 4 under new business tonight is the 2021 updated budget calendar. Mr. Killebrew.
So quick recap, when the budget was adopted a year ago, June, a budget calendar was put together for last fiscal year. And then as we came up to the beginning of this fiscal year in June, or it might have been May, the council adopted the FY21 budget calendar, which we then amended and told the council back in May when we brought it forward that we'd probably be amending it. So the council did approve an amended budget calendar. I want just to focus in on this. So we're a third of the way down the first page here, quarterly financial meeting tonight. The next significant work to be done will be at the council meeting in January, starting to talk about some long-term financial plan priorities particular to our capital projects, facilities, unfunded liabilities, and it's really just a kickoff of the budget season, if you will. And I don't want to say I'm stalling, but I am dragging my feet looking at the TOT numbers this year. Otherwise, we can do a bunch of work and have to make a bunch of changes as we move forward into the spring. Be bringing forward the strategic plan itself for general discussion with the council. The Public Works Department will have a capital improvement program update. I've got a draft of it actually last week to help me finish some of the numbers I'm working on as I start directing departments on budget, giving me some budget ideas for savings for this year and into next, just in case. And again, just discussing budget priorities. Plan on bringing that back into the Financial Review Committee the next week at the end of the January, our meeting there for some more discussions and input from the Financial Review Committee. And then as we move into February, I would expect the budget to be on almost every agenda as we move through the year. So the February 2nd one, again, is to talk about the long-term financial plan. Probably start actually looking at some numbers. I'll have some in January also on what our outlook is. We will continue to update those continuously, but also taking a look at some of our financial policies. The next item on our agenda tonight, talking about unfunded pension liabilities. There's a suggestion in there that I tend to agree with, that we're going to want to talk about having one specific, a strategic plan, if you will, on funding our unfunded pension liability. I don't think we're going to get to that policy on February 2nd in detail, but at least start the discussions. And then moving on to February 16th, again, budget priorities. And then as you look at each of the meetings rolling forward, we start budget workshops in April, where we're actually have the budget and a draft of the budget in front of us. And then budget workshops, May, both meetings in May, hoping to have the first budget hearing June 1st. And again, as we move through the year, we get a better sense for what's going on with COVID, its impacts on the economy, particularly our hospitality industry. And, you know, everything's still in flux right now, just seeing how long this is going to play out. There is a light out there somewhere. We just don't know where it's at as we clear through COVID's impacts, immediate impacts on the economy, and there will be lingering ones after. So that's the calendar. I just wanted to bring it back to the FRC since it did change. The council did change it last month, and I'm open for any questions.
Is there a certain time where this group talks about financial policy, loading up the reserves we are used?
Yes, that'll be part of the budget process. We actually had that in our September 15th City Council agenda report for the budget adjustments, that replenishing the economic stability reserve will be a consideration in this upcoming budget process. I've already got it kind of baked into my financial modeling.
Okay.
But the financial model changes based on priorities that the council decides on. But it's part and parcel part of our projections that we have to replenish it.
Got it. I didn't know if we needed like a specific document with a strategy, but it's baked in each of these discussions.
Yeah.
Anything else, Mr. Frost? I think that's actually a very good question, or a good point. The Financial Review Committee meeting that last week of January, I would expect would be a pretty detailed one. If we can make tonight a quick one, we'll probably saving time for that we're going to use in January, because if we can really work through a lot of those hard budget priority questions here, we'll save the council a bunch of time and make that council meeting go a lot more smoothly. If we can, for example, go through and validate that we've, lived up to our financial policy that says we will replenish the reserves, and we'll work through all that and validate that here in this committee, and then recommend to the city council that they don't have to have such a detailed discussion on some of this stuff. That's probably how you see it, Mr. Killebrew. Yeah, so
Yes.
Really, really good point. Yeah, that last week of January Financial Review Committee meeting ahead of the February 16th City Council discussion on budget priorities will be an important one.
Good.
Any other questions
Very
or
good.
comments? No? Investment return presentation.
And here we go again. So I'm going to go through this very quickly, but just want to explain that we do have GovInvest as one of the products we're using to project out budget liabilities and different game plans to attack the unfunded liability. That includes investments in a Section 115 trust, some prepayments, some possible prepayment of, I don't want to call it prepayment, some payoff of some of the components of the unfunded liability that might make the most sense. So we do have a modeling tool, and that what comes with that tool is some advice, if you will, consulting work. So we did get a Zoom presentation from GovInvest a while back. It's probably been a month and a half, 2 months. And I just, as soon as I got through with this presentation, I just asked staff put it on the FRC agenda just to quickly go through it to see some of the results of the consulting work we do get from this. So some general questions that they're addressing as they went through this presentation were, really kind of focusing, and a lot of clients were asking them, what happens with the losses, if you will, in their investments that they incurred in FY20 that ended June 30, that Calpers did. Because Calpers has an assumption that they're going to earn 7.25% return each year, and if they don't hit it, it creates essentially a actuarially determined unfunded liability. So Calpers only hit 4.7. If you recall, we're at the, still right in the front end of the COVID hit. The markets had tanked. They've since come back very strong, but there's a snapshot of the PERS fund at June 30, and it's at that point in time they determined, did we have a gain or a loss? And then they take that number, that actuarially determined number, and they start baking it into future rates. If it had been a gain, it would lower future rates over essentially a 20-year period. If they have a loss, it has the opposite effect. It'll hit your rates. So they wanted to show what happens with the 4.7% or 4.7% return compared to a 7.25% expected return, where they've got a 2.5% loss, if you will, from what they had expected. So moving on to slide. I'm not even going to get into slide 4, but it does show their asset allocation, how they make their investments. But I kind of want to focus a little bit on slide 5, 6, and 7. When you look at Calpers investment returns, it's always important to remember that they're in it for the long haul. If you look at our youngest employee or some of our youngest employees new in the career that are going to work 40 years and then be retired for 30, we're really looking at, a 50 to 70 year time horizon. And the fact that you have a loss in 1 year, there are gains in other years, there's a balancing. So it's important just to visually look at this investment return slide, because it's showing the red line being what they bake into their projections, what they assume, and what happens in any given year. And you see how the variations are pretty big. But what you have to also consider, and I'll show you on the next 2 slides in a second, is they take those gains and losses and they amortize them into the rates over a 20-year period. So this year's loss, so the FY20 loss won't actually hit until our FY22 budget year rates, and it'll be a portion amortized of that loss into those rates. That's also netted against portions of the prior year's gains and losses. So there's this whole crazy algorithm that the actuaries use. So if you look at the next one, just as an idea, you start seeing that, the 5-year average rolling returns, you'll see that when they're averaging them over 5 years, that the big swings start getting closer together. When you go to 10 years, they get even tighter. So you can look at 1 year and a lot of people might have a panic attack seeing a loss in a given year, but the fact is they get baked in over a longer period of time. It's always important to keep in mind that any bad year's bad, but you got to look at the running average here and know that they're looking at this over a very long time horizon. I did want to point out to this committee on slide 8 that it's not a simple 20-year amortization of the gain or loss into the rate. They do ramp it up. So they started about, I think it's 50% of what they would normally amortize. And then over the first 5 years, they finally ramp up to a number that goes out for the full 20-year amortization of the gain or loss. Going on to slide 9 is just an example showing you what happens to future years' rates with that when that current year loss is amortized in over time. And just looking all the way over at the right column, it changes the rates. Again, I mentioned they start in FY22. It's a 1.29% change of the existing rate. So it's not like it's a 1.29 of the total amount that we owe. It's of the existing rate. And when you do the math and you look at the second column, the change, it turns out to be about $70,000 a year. Not a small amount of money, but because you had a 2.5% loss in one year doesn't mean it's going to fully impact you. And that 1 year is, again, netted against the other 19 years in the formula. So it does have an impact, but I'll call it smooth over time. And looking at what it does on slide 10 to the unfunded liability, and again, this is an actuarial determined liability. So they're taking a look at the investments they have today, expecting to earn 7.25 over the long haul, and they've got the expenses they're going to incur paying people pensions over a lot of years that have mortality tables factored into it, and all kinds of COLA adjustments and everything else. That the real impact on the funding right now at June 30, 2020 was estimated that we were 80% funded. It drops it down on paper to 78.6% funded. And you'll see what it does. It always takes a hit on every given year as the amortization takes place until you get to the end of the amortization period, and you'll see that it's back to where it should be at 100. So it's a longer term. So the hit we took in FY20, the message is it wasn't a devastating hit. Chances are if they took the snapshot today, we're going to be up above the 7.25% for the year, for this year. And whatever, if we happen to have a gain this fiscal year, it then gets amortized in. A best practice, and it had been an identified best practice for many years. It's taken on a new life for some reason, literally since COVID. Strong recommendations on pension fund and liabilities. I think part of it has to do with some of these, and it's a good thing, but part of it has to do with some of these consultants, like the ones we hired, that get to help you out in putting these together, and then get to help you manage to the policy. But talking with Shane Kavanaugh from GFOA, I don't know, about 6 weeks ago, he said, yeah, everybody's looking at adopting these policies now. It's best practice. And I said, totally agree. So where we had it in our long-term financial plan, to quote in our policy number 229, that the long-term financial plan should include strategies that address long-term liabilities, such as pensions, debt, and other things. I'm looking at taking this kind of to the next step, and we were on a good track this last year, getting ready to fund the Section 115 trust and take out some of the amortization basis of the existing unfunded liability by paying into the fund, into the Calpers, but that all got sidetracked. I don't want to lose track of that. And as we come out of the pandemic, I think it would be wise if we actually had a policy that directed specific monies toward the unfunded liability with a plan to have it paid down, on some date certain. So I haven't even pulled up policies from other agencies and looked at them. Just the concept really makes sense to me, and I think it's consistent with what the council and the financial review committees have been talking about. And I think it just puts a little bit more definition on what it is we're supposed to be doing on a regular basis, and it's not some big number. We have a $6 million unfunded liability and we're going to throw some money at it, but actually get down in the weeds and say this presentation.
Questions or comments? No. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Mr.
Waiting for you to recognize me.
Mr. Victoric. I just
Thank
assumed
you.
you were going to say no.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yeah, just trying to, make sure I can wrap my head around this. So most of my questions, actually all of them will probably be for Mr. Kilbrew. So if the rate of return that Calpers makes, that's going to have an inverse effect on what our unfunded liability is, correct? Is that, I know you were talking about looking at it long term. So what does that mean for us in terms of making recommendations to city council? I know that we have looked at addressing this through the Section 115 trust. What does that mean? This is a very multifaceted question, I guess, looking for a lot of explanation. But if we are funding the Section 115 trust, that is up to us how much we want to put into it. When would that money be available, or when do we need it? And you see where I'm going with this? Maybe I'll just let you
So
answer.
the Section 115 trust is kind of the halfway point, but it's a halfway point you can't return from. So the thought of going into the Section 115 trust is we're going to be reserving the money in an account that we can't take back and use for other things. So it's only for pension costs. So we've taken kind of a step, but then at that point, the two things you get are you're not putting all of the money into Calpers where it's subject to their investment policies. The idea would be to have the Section 115 trust have a more conservative investment policy, less susceptible to market risk. Okay, so we could put it all in Calpers and it would pay down our unfunded liability. And then we're saying we hope Calpers hits their investment return. The Section 115 is a halfway point, if you will, or more than halfway, because you can't take it back. You can only spend it on pension payments, and we decide when we want to utilize it. And the thought was, as Calpers rates are increasing to tackle the unfunded liability, that at some point in 5, 6, 7 years, the corpus of the Section 115 trust will have grown, and then we'll start peeling it off of that to lighten the top of the curve on that increasing pension payment for the unfunded liabilities. We want to get it to a manageable number where we can fix it out and better plan long-term our overall finances. So if the unfunded liability pension payment 2 years ago was $450,000, last year it was $500,000, this year it's $530,000. And it's going up. We want to try and pick a time like 6 years out when it maybe be at $750,000. We say we want to hold our normal contributions out of our general fund at the $750,000 range. That helps us do our financial planning and predictability. And we'll use the Section 115 trust to start paying the excess amount. That when it grows from $750,000 to $800,000, Section 115 would pay $50,000. When it goes up to $850,000, you'd pay $100,000. So you're fixing your general fund contribution using the Section 115 trust to have a more predictable pension contribution. The goal, though, is always to pay it off at a certain date. The numbers we were running before COVID, doing this, we were going to be able to fix out our pension. Given everything else, then if nothing changed, that we'd be fixing out our general fund contribution. I think was at about $700,000. And that we'd be using the Section 115 trust starting in FY 26 or 27, and it was going to help us keep our normal payment at $700,000 and have the unfunded liability paid off by 2041, I believe. So that was the idea. So you're avoiding the risk of Calpers planning on trying to hit their 7.25 number, and we'd be investing it at a more safer and achievable 4% portfolio mix. So complicated, but we were trying to take the top off of the curve is really what it was, so that we didn't have this ever escalating unfunded liability contribution. Anyway.
Did you start to say something?
Oh, I was wondering what you thought we'd make in the Section 115, about 4%.
They have different options you can choose that have a target investment return. So I was looking at, they've got a couple options. The 4.5% option looked really safe. And they've been hitting over 6% with it. I don't know I haven't checked to see what they did in FY20, but consistently for a decade, they've been beating their lowered investment return rates without seeing losses. So unfortunately, when it got started back in, I want to say it was legislation to have these things came about, I think it was 2007. They launched these things, people put a bunch of money into them, and the Great Recession hit, and they had losses. So it really scared a lot of people away from them. I still think it was a good idea. For those that stuck it out, they've made their money back, the losses from 08, 09. And it's been serving them well. And not only that, they've baked it into their practice to actually put more money into the Section 115 trust to keep making sure that they're balancing their long-term projections for their actual normal payments. So, and it works. There's a lot of arguments they put it all in PERS and let them gamble with it too. So
let me, I want to actually, these are more kind of drilling down into some real, I guess, details, which I realize I just don't know. So the idea of the trust you'd mentioned, we can take money out for retirement or pension purposes out of the 115 trust, right? So is that on an annual basis? We're making up what we owe that they came in under what their projections were, so we have to make that up. Do we do that on an annual basis, or is it over time?
They take that annual, it's a paper loss. I mean, it's a real loss, but in the way they look at it, they actually made 4.7%. Okay, so Calpers did not lose money last fiscal year, but they didn't achieve their designed return of 7.25. So they have a paper loss because it's the 7.25 is projections, long-term projections. So they take that paper loss and then they try and make it up over time by taking that loss. So let's say you lost $1 million, they amortize it in to your rates over 20 years. That paper loss, they amortize it into your rates over 20 years. So it's not, you don't take the hit that year.
Okay.
You don't draw out of your Section 115 trust. You can to pay that off if you want to.
Okay.
And there might be times when you want to. You might be at the end of a horrible market and it looks like the sun is shining and the rainbows are coming out and the market's going to take off. And you might want to say, hey, I want to pay off that unfunded liability from last year. And you can take that amount of money that you lost on paper and actually give cash to CalPERS, make it go away, and they invest it.
Is the rate that we get from CalPERS, is that dependent on us, Dana Point specifically? Does it make any difference how many people we have that need pensions?
No.
Or,
this is what they actually earn on their portfolio for the plan that we're in, which is a small government plan.
Okay. Do you know, now this is a kind of an offshoot of that, is since we're a pretty young city, do you know how many people we have that are collecting pensions right now?
I want to say like 13.
Yeah. Okay. And do we have many people who are approaching retirement age or retirement eligible?
We have one this week.
That I'm aware of, yes, but I don't know if overall
there isn't a
looking out to the future.
No.
If that's going to
we don't have
dramatically increase.
We will have retirees, but I don't see the rate changing much. I think the rate will be more than what we saw in the 90s and into the early 2000s because we ended up in, I think, 2007, bringing in-house about 20 positions that had been contracted out previously, planning, building, and engineering in particular. But since then, we've actually reduced the head count. I think we're down at 62, maybe 64 FTE. And we were up over 70 at one point. I don't see the number of retirements spiking at any time soon. We have a pretty diverse age group in our workforce.
All right, thank you. Those are all the questions I have.
Mr. Frost?
Mine are probably just more, I find it interesting, Mike. Let's say Calpers aces it for the next 10 years and we've loaded up in the 115. I mean, does it just sit there just forever until we need it? If we ever need it? I mean, at some point, most likely we need
In
it. but-
any given year, if that were to happen and the council decided, hey, we want to save that $500,000 we would normally pay, because we're going to have to make payments anyway. There's
Yep.
there's normal costs because people are earning more pension credit every year. You could use the Section 115 trust to pay your normal payment. So it's not like it's locked there, and then you don't have to pay your normal payment out of your general fund. So you could do it that way. And the same thing would actually be the case in a horrible year. It's not like you don't have access to the money, but if something horrible happens and you need the $500,000 this year just to get by, you could also use your Section 115 money to make your normal payment. So it can only go toward pensions, but it just can't come back to the general fund. But there are ways you can't make more. I mean, I can do it 2 years in a row, I believe is what the limit is. And then you got to sit out a year. So I can't just keep making my normal payments out of the Section 115. So I could do the FY21 payment, I believe the FY22, and then I got to sit out a year. I have to use general fund money for a year. So it's not a permanent thing, but there are some limits that you can supplant a normal payment by utilizing Section 115.
That makes sense. And one final one. Let's just say we had an investment that earned just what 115 does. I guess there would be no value in 115 at that point. What other than the rate of return does 115 actually give us?
It gives the council making the investment into the 115 some assurance that it's going to be used for pensions, where if you just had your own investment, somebody could decide they want to build a monument to themselves as long as they get 3 votes. There's some certainty for the current decision makers. The other benefit is you've got professional investment managers. So we don't have it in our portfolio. I mean, I can't invest in stocks. These guys can through these mechanisms. PERS can, the city can't. So they've got access to certain investments that we can't do under the government code. That's how they're achieving that higher rate of return. I think, Robin, today I've got a closing comment from staff regarding our investments. We were just bidding out we've got a T-note maturing at the end of this week. And she bid it out, and I think she said the rates came in at 0.35 to 0.45% return. And I'm going to be letting you guys know we're not going to buy a 5-year T-note at 0.35% right now. So we're going to get away from our standing practice the last 2 years because of just the down. Anyway, so we don't have the same investment expertise or the ability to invest in some of the more lucrative, if you will, investments.
Got it. Okay. That makes perfect sense. Thanks.
So, do we pay taxes on any of the interest we make on our other investments, Robin?
No.
None of them are, okay. One of the benefits
Our
of
employees do when they get a pension payment, they pay taxes.
right, but our LAFCO or our T-bills or any of those, we don't pay tax on that. Okay, one of the benefits of a 115 trust is all the interest is tax-free, but it's not a benefit to us really. But for real, I mean, really the benefit is that we could be earning 4% on that $4 or $5 million compounded, waiting for that sweet spot 4 or 5 or 6 years from now, 6+ years from now, when the pension, unfunded pension payment grows and have significantly more than what we put in now to be paying that stuff down. And if Calpers hits their numbers we could then use that money to pay our regular payments, because we make two payments, a regular pension payment and the unfunded liability catch-up payment. I think because of the way that timing works, and I know we want to have the flexibility now for COVID, but we should probably be having the discussion on a regular basis as to when is the right time to put some of it in, even if it's not the entire, what's left now, 4 million?
4, yes.
4 million. Even if it's not the entire 4 million, maybe we at some point discuss at least putting half of it in to start earning that 4%. Keep buying us still the flexibility for the other 2 to use for the general fund or reserve repayment or whatever. But probably a discussion to have in the next couple of meetings when you guys can get ahead of that.
Yes.
Maybe we don't do it. I'm not advocating, but we should discuss it at least.
Agree.
4% on $2 million is not nothing. I guess the difference between 4% and 0.35%. So 3.7 is not nothing. I don't have any other questions. I think this is very good. The one thing I will make one more comment. There is a recommendation that they make on what to do to best practices for workforce cost management. It's on slide 16.
Mm-hmm.
And not surprisingly to me, Mr. Killebrew and the city staff are already doing, in my mind, all these things quite well. And this is kind of the one thing you can do in addition to figuring out how to pay for your pension is be responsible with what sort of pension benefits you offer to your employees. Because at the end of the day, none of them are any good if they bankrupt the institution. So I guess thanks for having done that already. And us not having to ask you to be looking at those things. Any other comments or questions? No? All right. We'll consider this item received and discussed. And staff reports, Mr. Kilburn, anything in addition?
So as I just mentioned, as another hat I wear under the municipal code as the city treasurer, when Robin presented the bids to me today, typically we would have been rolling over a T-note and rebalancing our portfolio with a portion going into a 5-year T-note, which is the maximum amount of time horizon that local governments can invest money. And seeing the 0.35 to 0.37 offers we got, and the fact that our local agency investment or our overnight funds, where we have a good chunk of our portfolio earning closer to 0.7%, a whopping 0.2 or 25 basis point increase, we decided we're going to sit on the sidelines for a while and just watch the market until the T-note market improves. And then we will endeavor to lock in and get back on our 5-year. Typically, you want to, our strategy is to balance the portfolio over time. You're going to get different offers, but the fact that we're down at 0.35, the downside of us sitting on the money and it going to 0% and not having something to invest in is not worth locking in for 5 years when the upside hopefully is a lot better. So, we'll continue to monitor the markets and at some point try and pull the trigger. I think our next lowest T-note that we have, I'm putting you on the spot. Yeah, so
We have like a 2 million.
yeah, we're not making bank on the investment earnings with this pretty conservative strategy, but it doesn't make sense to me to lock in money at 0.35%. So I just wanted to report that out.
I would agree with that. You want to get some? Would you like to get the committee to back you on that one? Does anyone have any concerns with that?
It's allowed under the investment policy. We're not locked into the 5-year. It was just something that the Financial Review Committee 4 years ago helped me work through and put together. Under the investment policy, we're allowed to invest in certain investments. We're doing that. It's okay to leave more money in LAIF, which is what we'll do. It won't be in our B of A account. It'll stay in, go into LAIF, and we'll just manage to a point when we can get back into a 5-year T-note.
Anyone have any concerns with that? Any staff or anything more, Mr. Kilburn, or any of the rest of the staff? Robin? Very good. All right. Any reports from the members of the committee? All right. Then the next regular meeting of the Financial Review Committee will be January 26th. That's got to be 2021, correct? At 6 p.m. Here in the City Council Chambers, 33282 Golden Lantern, Suite 210, Dana Point. We are adjourned.